Welcome to A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. From Eden to eternity, the Bible tells one big story of redemption. My name is Tiffany, and I want to spend a few minutes with you every day walking through the Bible chronologically. Together, we will explore God's sovereign plan as the events of Scripture unfold and point to Jesus.
Hey, Year in the Bible family. Welcome back to the podcast. Tiffany here, and today we return to 2 Samuel and study chapters 22 through 23, as well as Psalm 57. After all the running, battles, and family issues, David's life is drawing to an end. But despite the difficult aspects of his life, there are many reasons for him to rejoice in the Lord and celebrate his confidence in his great God. We will see that today as he shares his final song and last words. This doesn't mean David is on his deathbed. He simply is looking back over his life and remembering all the Lord has done. Before we dig into these chapters, I do want to provide some context from the end of 2 Samuel chapter 21. We read this chapter 2 days ago, and I didn't have a chance to talk about the last 8 verses. They actually set up today's chapters quite perfectly. In these 8 verses, we read about David's final battle with the Philistines. David had battled the Philistines his whole life, and as he goes out to battle this time, he becomes exhausted and is almost struck down. Abishai, his nephew and one of his mighty men, saves him and tells David that it is time for him to rest from battle. The nation needed their king, and God had provided plenty of mighty men to take up the charge. And so we note the passing of time in David's life. Like many people who are nearing the end of life, David seemingly takes stock of all that has occurred in his life in his song of thanksgiving in 2 Samuel 22. This song is almost word for word the same as Psalm 18. Psalm 18 was likely written after Saul's death and before David took the throne. We studied it between the end of 1 Samuel and the beginning of 2 Samuel as a bridge between the two books. Scholars believe that David returned to these words from Psalm 18 later in his life as he thought about God's provision, protection, and salvation. These words applied earlier in David's life, but they applied all the more in the latter part of his life. The truths David learned and shared over the course of his life also hold great weight for us as we worship the Lord for our salvation as well. David's song is an expression of his gratitude toward the Lord, a gratitude that grew over many years and through many trials. He begins by clearly stating that God is his rock, fortress, deliverer, refuge, shield, salvation, and stronghold. He is worthy of all praise because he saved David from the depths of Sheol. Verses 8 through 16 describe the Lord's salvation like a volcano or storm that creates an earthquake, shaking the heavens and the earth, as he saved David like a mighty victor in battle. In verse 18, David says, "He rescued me from the powerful enemy and from those who hated me, for they were too strong for me." This verse reminds believers that our mighty victor is Jesus. Jesus saved us from the clutches of sin and the power of evil. On our own, we were helpless, but Jesus stepped out of heaven and came down to make a way back to the Father. Through his sacrifice, we can declare what David does in verse 20 when he says, "He brought me out to a spacious place. He rescued me because he delighted in me." David's song continues, and he declares that God is faithful, blameless, pure, light, and perfect. He returns to the rock language to state how he stands on these truths of God's character. And in the final verse, he sings about the beautiful covenant God made with him. We read about the Davidic covenant in 2 Samuel 7:16, when God promised, "Your house and kingdom will endure before me forever, and your throne will be established forever." In 2 Samuel 22:51, David says, "He is a tower of salvation for his king. He shows loyalty to his anointed, to David and his descendants forever." God's loyalty was to the plan of redemption in his Son. He established David's throne and his descendants to usher in salvation through Jesus Christ. We too sing David's song with gratitude and confidence. David's gratitude and confidence are also seen in his last words in chapter 23. Again, this doesn't mean he was on his deathbed, but as death loomed in this later part of his life, there were important truths to share. His final words served a couple of purposes. First, he shares all the positions God gave him for God's glory, not David's. Second, he returns to a familiar pattern of comparing the righteous and the wicked. For the righteous, God is their salvation, and for the wicked, God is a consuming fire of judgment. God had taught David many things through the course of his life, and he pared them down to show that everything is for God's glory, and we will either walk the path of righteousness or wickedness. Which will we choose? The remainder of chapter 23 hopefully seemed familiar. We read this account in 1 Chronicles 11 several weeks ago as we worked our way through the genealogies and military accounts. Here in 2 Samuel 23, we once again read about David's warriors who served him with great loyalty and might. These accounts of glorious victories in battle are impressive, but we want to note the places where we read, "The Lord brought about a great victory." These men were indeed mighty, but it was the Lord who gave them their might. And these mighty men would now take the reins to fight on David's behalf in his old age. When we read about the quote-unquote 30, we quickly notice there are more than 30 names listed. This likely means one of two things. The list includes the names of those who died and those who replaced them, or the group was added to over time and they were still known as the 30, no matter how many of them there were. Either way, God used this group to aid David, but more importantly, to further his plan for Israel and redemption. We close today with Psalm 57. This psalm was actually written by David when he fled from Saul to the cave of Adullam. We read a recounting of this event in 2 Samuel 23, 13 through 17. The words of this psalm speak to David's confidence in the Lord at that time and echo the confidence he sung about in his final song so many years later. In Psalm 57:7, David declares, "My heart is confident, God. My heart is confident." This confidence comes from God's faithful love and the refuge he provides. David experienced this time and again in his life. How much more is David's confidence in the life of believers? What he saw dimly, we see clearly now through the salvation of Jesus Christ. God sent his faithful love in the form of his Son. We rejoice in the confidence we have that he will return and we will dwell with him forever. Thanks for joining me today. Tomorrow, we return to the Psalms. I will see you then, friends. Bye.